All right, here's the 2-foot jump comparison. On the left are a couple volleyball attacks sent by former Division I player Julie Sam, and the right is 2 soccer players performing jumping headers sent to me by Chris Simpson. Now clearly they're all 2-foot jumps and the approaches are relatively short, but some acceleration is still needed to get a higher jump versus just a standing 2-foot jump. I'll discuss the volleyball approach and the first header initially, and then we'll get to the second header. So with these type of jumps, even though both feet leave the ground together, they don't act the same. The penultimate step acts more like the block foot of a single leg jump, in the sense that it's much further out in front of the body than a normal stride, and this will apply the majority of braking forces. It also leads to generally longer ground contact times in that penultimate and an overall slower stretch shortening cycle. And compared to the penultimate step in a 1-foot jump, there's a lot more bending at the hip and knee on contact here. In contrast, the block step of a 2-foot jump has very short ground contact times, and it has to amortize very quickly. It's very elastic. You can see that by the time the block makes contact with the ground, there's no more lowering of the center of mass. Basically, the moment that last step makes contact is when concentric action begins. Ideally, it contacts the ground just in front of the center of mass. A common mistake that you see in 2-foot jumpers is that they have this block step too far underneath their center of mass, and then it makes it harder for them to extend at high velocities. Another aspect to note, even though the penultimate step lands whole-footed, just like with a single leg jump, with the block step, the heel doesn't touch the ground usually. Something interesting that occurs with 2-foot jumps is that this block foot step turns inward slightly, so that the knees kind of face each other. Now, some coaches might see this and freak out, saying that it'll lead to knee injuries, but it's actually a very common trait for 2-foot jumpers, especially when they're looking to kill horizontal momentum and turn it into primarily vertical. Now, you'll almost always see a double arm swing with 2-foot jumps, but the timing is critical. They essentially strike down as the concentric action begins, and then the arms follow upward to add momentum during extension. Now, what goes on mid-flight, just like with single leg jumps, depends on context and what the athlete is trying to achieve. Because both the volleyball attack and a header require anterior action, so that's like down and forward action, you see both athletes extend their spine back, and then they powerfully crunch forward into what's called a pike position. The soccer player does so to head the ball forcefully, and the volleyball player to hit the ball downward with her hand onto the other side of the court. Okay, now to that final jumping header. I want to show that not all 2-foot jumps are created equal. The other two were more of a traditional approach style, but here you see that the athlete doesn't have a pronounced penultimate or block step. It's more of a gather while hopping, and then the feet contact the ground together and act the same throughout stretch shortening cycle. You actually see this all the time in sports, especially when an athlete doesn't have room to approach prior to the jump. It's very elastically dominant. So to get those qualities, most of the preloading is done in that hop step, and then both feet can amortize and push together. It's maybe not ideal to get a maximum vertical jump, but when you have to react fast and get off the ground, you'll see a lot of jumpers naturally do this to get more height as opposed to just a standing vertical jump.